Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the ELTcpd podcast. Super excited to have Gareth with us today from Spain. Hi, Gareth. How are you?
There, good, thank you.
Good. I said from Spain, but you're actually from the UK, right? You just live in Spain.
That is true. Yeah, I live here now, but yeah, you could tell probably from my face and my accent, there's definitely not a Spanish person.
Whereabouts in the UK are you from?
So I grew up in the south, in Hampshire, basically.
Oh, me too.
We moved around a lot, but excellent. Whereabouts?
I'm from between Portsmouth and Southampton originally. What about you?
Okay, Farnborough.
Okay, nice. Not too far.
There you
don't
go. Yeah.
tend to meet many people from Hampshire, so it's nice to meet you. So maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, like where you got started and what your background is in ELT.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me, when people ask me that, like the plan was never to become a teacher. I studied at university film studies. I went on to do screenwriting, and that was kind of the thing I was really focused on doing. And then, of course, straight out of university, I needed something else to do while working on projects. So I spoke to a few friends who were doing this. This friend was in China, and he said, "Oh yeah, you should try it out." So I did my CELTA. And yeah, I think when I just got started, I thought I really like doing this. This is great. And just as I sort of continued through, started off in the UK. So I got to meet like lots of other nationalities. I had students from South America, from Europe, and just thought, oh yeah, all these interesting people that you can meet. And just got hooked really. And I thought, okay, this is something I want to work on now.
And so where did that take you? Like, obviously, you said you worked in different countries and different things. Are you still a teacher or what?
Yes, yeah, I'm still a teacher now. So really, at first, it was all in the UK. I did like bits and pieces here and there. I did a summer camp in Germany. And then I kind of got my first abroad job in Italy. I was in the south of Italy for a couple of years, which was amazing food. So I definitely stayed there, enjoyed that for a few years. And then, after that, I just thought, well, okay, where next? And thought, okay, Spain looks nice. And I never planned to remain in Spain, but then I found a really nice school and I just had a great time and I've really settled down now. So again, none of this was planned. It's just all happened. I'm just sort of going with the flow, as it were.
I think that happens in teaching, doesn't it? I was the same when I first got into it. I was basically what you described. I taught in China and Italy, and then I thought I really like doing this, not just for the travel, right? I mean, obviously that's bonus.
Exactly. That was at first a good thing, but then you realize, no, actually, this is a serious career. There's always that in ELT at the beginning. Some people don't think, oh, it's just for travel, isn't it? But no, of course, you open your eyes, you see, no, this is a serious business, and it's one that I enjoy working in. So you end up staying in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people don't really realize how many different paths there are within ELT as well.
Absolutely.
But that's another episode in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So you work in a language school now, or do you work for yourself, or?
No, so I work in a language school now. So obviously it's all Spanish students. I think normal size classes, sort of 12, 13 students, mostly teenagers. I do have a couple of adults, but just the demand for teaching young learners and teenagers is just so much higher. I think especially in a small town, there's not that many adults, but we have a good number who are interested. But it's mainly with teenagers and things like that.
Great. And today we're sort of focusing on specifically teaching advanced student speaking, right? So would you say that the majority of your experience has been teaching advanced students?
Yeah, I mean, obviously at the beginning, you sort of, you work your way up going through, but particularly when I got to this academy, I started off with mostly sort of B2. And then for the past 3 or 4 years, I've been doing a lot of C1. And I think for me, with my background, that's when I thought, I can really hit the ground running here, and I can bring in some of that other experience I've got. And then we can do a lot more with that now that they've got that language we can play with. So I think it's, for me, become, one of my favorite levels to teach.
I imagine, because obviously you're teaching in a monolingual context, it's quite difficult to get students to sort of practice their speaking because they know that their partner or their group speak Spanish, right? So how do you overcome that?
Is the biggest sort of bugbear when you're teaching in these academies and you say, right, everything's going to be 100% in English, which of course is the dream, but obviously, I mean, especially in the lower levels, but even in the higher levels, there are those moments when they're using those kind of daily words just to sort of check with their partner. Oh, I didn't understand. Can you help me with that? Can you tell me the word for this? You think, oh, all these exchanges are things which you could be doing in English as well. So I think really, I mean, the biggest way around that is just to make sure they've got those basic phrases. I think a lot of times that does get overlooked. That, well, what can I say to my partner when I do have a question and I don't understand, or I'm just checking together with my partner. What's the best language that I can use to do that? All the other stuff that's not in the textbook that you're teaching, or the extra language. Just make sure they've got those phrases so they actually know, how do I actually do that with my partner?
Really, really good point, actually. Like you said, aside from the course book, right? Like just knowing how to say, what does that mean? Or can you tell me this? Or, that's really useful. So do you
Precisely.
find that you're creating sort of supplementary materials, or are they sort of set phrases that you teach at the beginning of a term or a course, or how do you work that on?
I think really, yeah. I think there's several ways. I mean, I think for me, it's just in principle, every time we say, right, we're going to jump into this speaking task, and these are kind of the expectations. This is the language which I'd like you to use, and I think if we sort of go through with the students first. I mean, there are several ways that you could present that, as in this sort of language. Whether you're just literally, okay, I'm going to put the language up on the board. Okay, that's the language. Use that language, or whether you're going to do other kind of more kind of activity based things to get them using that kind of language, particularly in a speaking activity, or even if it's we're going to check something together, right? But use this language as well, put that up on the board. So you're just remembering that step in the class. So right now, also use this, please, as well.
And I imagine, so a lot of the teachers that sort of listen to this podcast teach in a similar situation, right? They teach in monolingual classes, but perhaps I'm just making the assumption that you know a bit of Spanish here, but the teacher maybe also knows some of the language.
Yeah.
And so how do you stop the students from saying, well, you know it in Spanish, so why don't you just tell me that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think at times, it depends what we're talking about here. If we're just talking like we have a doubt about a particular piece of vocabulary, and I know what that is in Spanish, and like then, okay, I think for me that's absolutely fine. That's a moment when it's a particular element of the language that they just need to know to continue with the class. So it's like, okay, in that case, there is no problem. But I mean, this doesn't really happen in the higher level classes, but I'll make a point and say, no, right, for example, a lot of students will say to me, particularly in the lower levels, oh, teacher, can I speak to you in Spanish? And I say, try in English first. Let's see what you can do in English first. Let's give that a go. And 9 times out of 10, they can say a couple of words and you kind of, right, no, this is what you're trying to tell me. Oh, okay, right. Okay, gotcha. And interestingly enough, and it happens in the high levels as well, when the class is finished and okay, English is over, can I speak to you in Spanish now? I say, no, come on, let's talk in English. You can do that, can't you? Like, come on. Just to make it clear, no, come on, but this is what we're doing. I'm here for that. And I feel like I have this barrier. I'm sort of like, no, I'm the teacher, so let's just speak in English. Even when I see them on the street, I'm like, what do I say? Hello in Spanish, or do I say hello? I just go, no, I'm going to say it in English because I'm your English teacher. That's kind of my role here. So
That's a good way to think about it. Do you think that there is a need for L1 then in lower language classes, or do you think sometimes it might be useful, like if students are using their home language?
I mean, I think you can have that kind of knee-jerk reaction of no, let's not use it at all. Like it's not useful. Let's get rid of that. But I think you got to think, well, for what is the situation? Like we're doing a speaking task, and the student then wants a word perhaps in the instructions that they don't understand, or there's a word in that task they don't understand. If we then say no, we're going to do all in English, make a class out of it, well, we're actually stopping their time for speaking practice. So I think it's just choosing, like, well, what is the situation here? Is this going to interrupt the activity we're doing by trying to make a great big presentation so that you understand through English, or right, actually, this is the answer. Oh, okay, and then continue. Which I think it's just choosing, what's happening, and would it be more useful to just give a translation or not?
So just thinking about my own experience, obviously it was a monolingual or multilingual class, but sometimes it can also be useful for the students to teach you, right? So like tongue twisters in Spanish, or perhaps certain phrases. How do you say that in your language, because then they're using English in an authentic way to try and sort of teach you. and instruct you.
Like idiomatic expressions and things like this. If there's one that we've got in English and we can say, right, have you got something similar in Spanish? And you find out it's sort of similar but different, and then you can maybe even ask them, oh, that's so strange. Like, do you know, where does that come from? Or why do you say that? And yeah, you can even start investigating a bit more into that language. So yeah, and I think that's really empowering. I think that's something that we probably will come to in this, is sort of empowering the students with giving them that confidence to speak. And I think, yeah, getting them to, right, now you teach me something. Well, that gives them the power because they've got that knowledge. I think that's also a key thing that we'll probably end up talking about, I imagine.
Exactly. Well, let's go on to that now. What are some things you think? Let's start with the barriers. So, what do you think some of the barriers are, aside from everyone speaking the same language, to students practicing their spoken English?
Let's just start with the obvious one. I mean, okay, I'm here in Spain. I've got students who want to practice their English. They go home. Okay, you know, who are they going to talk to outside of class? They can do listening, they can do reading, they can do writing, they can do lots of these other skills. They can learn their grammar and vocab, but who are they talking to? And that's probably like the biggest thing. Obviously, nowadays, and as you know, I've seen recently talking about using ChatGPT for speaking practice. So that actually now is less of a barrier if the students are willing to get involved with this new technology. If we're willing to, well, I think, you know, showing it to the students, motivating them to try out this thing. That word motivation, I think, is going to be really important as well. And that's not just for speaking, for all the other skills, especially these teenagers who are so busy at school, and English does sort of take a bit of a back seat. But I think if we, you know, show them some new technology that could maybe make it interesting for them, say, oh, that looks interesting, and everyone's talking about this. Okay, maybe I will try doing it. It could be the motivation that they need. So I think that is a very big thing. But I guess the word fear, I guess that, you know, we're talking about, we're in the classroom, right, guys, we're going to do this speaking activity. Well, they're just, you know, that fear of making a mistake, saying something, and the rest of the class responding and laughing at them. And I really think, especially teenagers, especially, really feel, oh, right, yeah, if I've got these ideas in Spanish that I want to express, but yeah, maybe I'll just say a little bit, you know, because maybe I get the rest of it wrong. I'm not so sure. Could be vocabulary as well, that kind of uncertainty. I think I know some words for this, but I'm not sure. So maybe it's better just to be quiet and not really express myself. So that fear and the lack of the language. And I think one other thing that I've seen a lot with adult students is the word, my accent. My accent's terrible. And I really think they really feel about that. And I think I just say to the duration, well, when I speak in Spanish, it's this strange British Spanish that comes out, and it's, you know, and I think some people are better at getting those accents. I mean, it's almost like acting, you know, it's like a different skill. It's not the pronunciation, it's something completely different. It's like, it's not necessary, guys. You don't need that. But I feel like, yeah, that is a big fear that they have, this idea of my accent doesn't sound like a British person or an American or something like this.
Definitely. I know for me, I can't roll my R's in Spanish.
Yeah.
So the word dog and the word butt are the same for
Exactly.
me. So.
It's very challenging.
Exactly. And so thinking about the contrary then, what do you personally do, or what are some top tips for making students just feel more confident in their abilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think for me, one of the biggest things I stumbled upon was ideas. And that leads into the vocabulary as well. So I've noticed that if I do some sort of thinking activity first, that they then have some ideas, that when they come to speaking, it's a lot more fluent and they seem a lot more relaxed doing it. So
Interesting.
get,
What do you mean by thinking task? Just I'm thinking from sort of like a materials writing perspective, because when I write materials, I get told not to write thinking tasks
yeah,
because there's no tangible evidence of that.
exactly.
So is that something you supplement, or?
Were tangible evidence. So, for example, one of the activities I did the other day actually was it was actually not a speaking task, but it turned into a speaking task. We were doing the essay, and I thought, right, I want to get them some ideas for doing an essay. So I gave them a sheet of paper, and you've got like this at C1, you've got like the 3 ideas that could answer a question, something like, how can schools help children to get jobs in the future? And you had like ideas like, you know, do work experience. Okay, so I wrote work experience on a paper. One paper was work experience positive, the other was work experience negative. And then the other ideas. So we had these sort of 6 papers and just sort of gave it to a pair. Right, you've got a minute. Write some ideas. Okay, they wrote some ideas. Right, pass the paper to the next team. Right, next team, read what they wrote, add something different. Okay, right, write something different. And then we ended up passing it all the way around. So you have this paper full of these ideas. I said, right, now we'll have a debate. So we get the positive and we get the negative. Right, come together. You're going to have a debate now. Use the ideas that are on that paper and now go for it and have your debate. And then it was really interesting. Then they had been talking about it for a long time. They'd seen all the ideas of all the other students as well. And then it's there on the paper. And they really went for it. And then when it finished, I sort of said, right, now having done the debate, where do you stand? Do you think that's positive? Do you think that's negative? Like, where would you take that? And then that gave them millions of ideas for then later going into a writing task. So just doing that kind of thinking, but on paper, so that the evidence is there, that, right, I can see you've thought because you've written these ideas out. And that was really empowering, I think, for them.
So like brainstorming, mind mapping, even working with a pair, right? Sort of peer learning from others. If they haven't got any ideas, hopefully their partner might or their group might. That's really nice.
Like an exam-based context, you say, well, that's the goal. We want to get to the speaking part 3 or whatever it is of Cambridge. But instead of just saying, right, let's go, off you go, speak. But let's take that first. Okay, let's look at the topic. Let's look at the different things, maybe even thinking of the different vocabulary that we could use, and just you're getting all those words out, getting those ideas first. Then we'll go and do the task. Obviously, in the real exam, they have to just jump straight in. But that's after having done a few years of this practice and getting those ideas and being ready to do it. So especially at first, really important, I think, to give them those stepping stones to get to where they need to be.
Exactly. I think you just touched on what I was going to ask as well. Sort of, we can make students feel confident in lessons, but when it comes to their exam, perhaps they don't have that time to think. But I gather from sort of what you're saying that because they've honed those skills and practiced those skills, that when they come to those exams, hopefully they feel a bit more prepared and confident, right?
Yeah. And it sort of ties into what I said earlier about giving them those sort of phrases. Something I stumbled upon, it was when I was sort of looking at the part 4 of the exam, where they have to give like longer answers, and just they were not giving me longer answers, just one opinion, and that's all I have to say. But there are, that's all you have to say, but there's a lot more in the world that could be said about that topic. You really haven't delved into it. So giving those phrases like, okay, on the one hand, but on the other, in summary, it's a bit like an essay, an essay but spoken. And I thought, well, I'll give you those phrases. And it just sort of, then you do it enough times and they know, right, now I have to say a contrasting argument, don't I? And then they think about one and they deliver it. So just phrases like that, like simple linking words perhaps, but giving them in a sort of a structure. And then they practice those structures. So when they come to the exam, they're like, right, I'm going to say this. Oh, but yes, now I remember I have to give the contrasting opinion, don't I? And then I probably should give a summary. And then what? You've now just given a really great answer. So I think that's really important to give them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, because we give them such a format for writing, right? You've got your introduction, your main body paragraphs, your summary. So why not have that for speaking? Of course, it's not what people generally speak like, but actually it is in a way. We just do it subconsciously, right? So, I mean, there's an introduction, a middle, and an end to this conversation. So it's the same principle, definitely.
Exactly, yeah.
So just thinking about sort of the teaching context that you've been in, have you only been in monolingual situations or also sort of multilingual classes as well?
Well, it was multilingual at the beginning, and this was actually quite interesting in thinking about that. What are the benefits of both sides? And I sort of thought, you know what, like when I've had those mixed classes, I think I had someone from Switzerland, someone from South America, someone from somewhere else. And this was a beginner class as well. Quite a low, it was an A2 level class. And there was just a lot of awkward silence of just sort of sitting there like, well, I actually don't know anything to say, so I'm just going to sit in silence. So you could sort of say that in a monolingual class, they're just going to chat together in Spanish, aren't they? So, if they were there, they would talk so much more in English. It's like, well, or they would just sit in silence. So it's sort of that, just because of the situation doesn't mean they're going to go for it. So coming back to those ideas of the phrases, and even just the conversational side, of being able to walk in the class and have a few phrases to say, oh, hi, how's it going? And training them to do that as well. So it's not this sort of, oh, well, I can't speak anything, so I'll just be quiet. No, but give them the language they need to do it. I think that's what it comes down to, just not having the language to do it, and they're just afraid to even get going. So you just got to help them out, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, I didn't think about the multilingual perspective, because if you think about sort of your situation where everyone speaks Spanish, I guess you've got that cultural understanding and that
Mm,
unspoken sort of background of each other as well. So perhaps they might feel a little bit more confident in that respect anyway,
I
rather
think
than,
so as
a
well.
Spanish person speaking to someone from Switzerland or Germany or whatever, and not really
Yeah,
knowing that context so much.
because
So
it also comes down to just real life, isn't it? Like if you are in a room of with people you don't know, you're not going to be as have such motivation to want to start speaking with them. And I feel like perhaps in those situations they might feel, well, I know you less because I don't even know your culture or your background. So I think that's also just breaking the ice, doing lots of activities like that, and not just in the first class. Because I think we do that a lot. We start our course, right? We do the icebreaker class, right? The icebreaker class is done. Now we just do the book, and you get to the end of the year and they're like, oh, and she said this. Well, who's she? Like, I don't know. Like, how do you not, you've been in this class all year with this person. So I think just making sure we're doing enough of that, like mix them around, make sure they're sitting in different places, make sure they're chatting to different people, but getting to know them as well, not just the icebreaker in the first class. I think that could actually be really useful.
yeah, 100%. And what are some of your favorite activities, thinking about,
Mm,
let's go towards sort of more advanced students, perhaps,
yeah.
activities that sort of practice speaking in a more authentic way?
Yeah. I mean, I think I like doing a lot of creative things. As I said, for my background was sort of in this sort of writing and a bit of sort of a drama-ish sort of background, but I don't like using the word drama because then people just think of you're doing theatre or something, which it's not. Um, Role plays, exactly. And I think, yeah, when people think of role plays, I think sometimes they get a bad rep because people just think of standing on stage being an actor. But it's like, no, a role play is going into a shop and buying something. That's a role play, and giving them those real world situations. It could be as simple as, let's say it's an advanced level and it's that sort of persuading language, like, okay, you've got this t-shirt, it's there's a problem with it, it's the wrong size or something, but you haven't got the receipt. Oh no, right, you've got to go and you've got to persuade this shopkeeper to give it to you. And you've actually created a dramatic situation there, because it's like, well, I want to return this, but you won't let me, right? And now they've got to have that sort of debate and that thing. And within that, you've got functional language, so phrases for persuasion. Right, we're going to need phrases for persuasion in there. Um, Depending on what role play you create, it could be a role play based on making suggestions. We have to think of suggestions. The good old classic, you're stuck on the desert island. How do you escape the desert island with these 10 useless items? That's a role play because you've got a situation, you're a group of friends in a situation that's not yourself, and you've got to debate how to get out of it using functional language. And I do find that, especially, yeah, with the higher levels, when they've got enough base language to be getting on with, they can really get into it, especially depending on what the situation is. So let's say they're really into like some reality TV shows or something. You could make a context where, right, you're on a reality TV show and here's your situation, right? You've got to persuade each other to do something, and then they seem to really get into it because they're not them anymore. They're now in the shoes of someone else. They forget about who they are, and they have a bit of fun with it. I think, which is really important.
Definitely. And do you find that that works with all ages? Like adults get into it just as much as teenagers, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've really had success with my teenagers, I would say. Like, they really go for it. I think sometimes some adults might be a bit more like, it's just so different to anything that they've seen before. And they're like, "Ooh, what we doing here?" But, I do still encourage it. And they do eventually get into it, I think. I mean, it depends on the person. It's just down to personal preference. But you give them that encouragement, you give them the structure, you give them the phrase, step by step, take them through, and then they're going to get into it. If you just said, right, have at it, I think they don't know. So you just give them that language, give them the stepping stones, some examples, and then they'll probably start getting into it.
Yeah, and maybe thinking about their own situations as well. Right? I'm sure 99, if not 100% of people have taken something back to a shop before, or 100% of people have been to a grocery store before as well. Maybe having some realia in the classroom as well, having, oh, this is the jumper that you're taking back, or
Yeah.
like you
Well,
mentioned
that's
earlier,
it. Yeah.
debates are also really
But
useful.
something for adults as well, like the holidays from hell, and you've got those lovely there's tons of videos, and they've done series on this where holidays went wrong. Right now, you're going to complain to the rep about your situation, and how many adults have probably been on a holiday where they've either complained or wish they had complained. So just finding that situation which they've been in. And then it's also funny for them because they're kind of drawing on that experience, and they're like, oh yeah, I wish I'd said that in the real world. Well, now I can say it in my English class. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think sometimes thinking about sort of lower levels as well, it's quite difficult when it comes to lower levels and adults, right? It's hard not to
Mm.
sort of baby adults in that respect, because they're adults, but they're learning sort of beginner English, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the situation I
Well,
found earlier was like I was writing about animals, and the topic was animals, like wild animals, but it was for adults. It was a course book for adults. So I was like, okay, how do we make this work? So it was something like choosing a hero animal story that you read in the news sometimes. I think it was
oh
about an
yeah, of course.
elephant in Thailand that rescued a girl with her trunk or something from a tsunami or a wave or something. So just finding something unusual, something strange, but something that's real world as well, rather than just being like, this is an elephant. So yeah, yeah, for sure.
Precisely, something which something they've got experience with that they're interested in as well. And I think that really comes down to this, and also now with ChatGPT and with AI, of making these resources. And a lot of these role plays I've done, I will get ChatGPT to kind of make the role card as well. And it's kind of like a reading practice. They get to sort of, okay, this is me, this is my background. Um, Other ones I've done are with sort of strengths and weaknesses. So you say, okay, this is you. Let's say it's a job, going for that sort of good old classic job interview role play. Give them a role play, give them a role. It's like, you've got, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. Like, now you've got to go into your interview, you've got to admit your weaknesses, and this is good language as well, using those concessions. Well, although I'm not really good at this, actually I'm quite good at that. So and now we can do that and think about their interests. Okay, I'm interested in this, right? Okay, I'll get ChatGPT to make me this sort of background of these characters, and now they can read it and then practice it and go. So especially now, it's so much easier to tailor stuff to their interests.
Definitely. So would you say that you find you have to supplement quite a lot just because the course books, I don't know, perhaps the course books you're using don't bring the authentic sort of language to life, or how do you
Yeah.
feel about that?
Well, this is where it kind of comes down to that kind of catch-22. A lot of the time in these academies, you've got your syllabus, you've got your material that you're using, and you've got, right, this is what I've got to get through with my students. And then you say, but perhaps the reading's not interesting for them, or this isn't interesting for them. So you think, right, actually, I think this activity which I've made here would be really good in that situation. And I think rethinking it a bit as well. Let's say it's a page of vocabulary. Well, let's take that vocabulary, let's pop that into some other activity they'd be interested in, and then we can kind of get rid of that page, and we'll do it instead as this sort of speaking activity where they get to learn the sort of vocabulary. Perhaps say like they've got a character background, you get maybe the vocab could come out first, and then we get to speak together. So I think it's just being a bit sort of clever about how you approach this. You don't have to do one or the other, like teaching the book or you're teaching something else. Well, how can I actually get what's in that book and take it out and put it in something new? And again, I'm sort of really getting into using AI a lot now. And you think, well, actually now I can sort of take that and say, right, AI, use these words, put them into, as I say, it could be a role play, could be a story, could be any kind of text that you want to make, and then you can get that going. And then as we are talking about speaking today as well, and then obviously we can use that for a speaking task, which perhaps is a topic they enjoy.
Definitely. And thank you for the plug earlier for our YouTube video on practicing speaking using
Well,
ChatGPT.
I tried it earlier in Spanish, and it was actually really interesting because it's about pronunciation as well for the students. Can they pronounce the words? And I've got to say, some of my pronunciation in Spanish did lead ChatGPT to not be quite so sure what words are right. So, right, okay, I need to pronounce that word better as well. So that was a lot of fun as well. I had a lot of fun doing that. So
It's interesting. Just for anyone listening who hasn't seen it, it's basically the app of ChatGPT. There's a microphone button when you first open it, not on the desktop, just on the app version. And you can have a conversation as if you're speaking to a person. Just be careful if you're doing something like booking a table, because it actually might try and book a table at a restaurant for you. But yeah, they've introduced lots of new languages now. I've seen they've introduced lots of new dialects. I saw Jamaican patois has been introduced, Yoruba and Nigerian. So there's loads and loads of different languages that have been released since we actually recorded that video, when I think there are only 3 or 4 English voices. So yeah, really,
Yeah.
really great tool to guide students towards, or perhaps use in class as well.
Well, yeah, getting to do things outside of class as well. But I think talking about what we've been talking about through this is when I tried it earlier without any preparation, and I really realized, whoa, I don't know what to say. And I said, right, let's talk about films. I like films. And then it was asking me all these specific questions. I don't know what to say. So I think that really made me think, wow, yeah, preparation, getting ideas before you start speaking is really important, because you just think, I do know about this topic, but if someone just asks you a cold question, it really is difficult to actually know how to respond. So I think that's something I've thought, yeah, definitely make sure I give my students that time.
Yeah, you needed those set phrases, but in Spanish.
I did. That was it. I didn't have them.
So what are your top teachers? What are your top tips for teachers? Let's go for your top 3 tips for teachers who are trying to get their students to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I did mention before some perhaps phrases, but you can use certain tasks. So one of my go-to is speaking bingo. So we take those phrases, we put them into a bingo grid, and you're actually just doing it as like a listening task. So they've got their bingo grid, and as they're talking to their partner, they cross off what their partner has said. And basically they're going to tell at the end to their partner whether that partner got bingo or whether that partner got a certain few lines. And what that does, it's not just about trying to use vocab. It's not a vocab class, but if there's certain phrases, it's actually getting them to use them, and it gives them ideas. Because when you've got a structure, it does give you ideas. It's that whole idea of restrictions actually do breed more creativity. So they've got those phrases on the paper and say, right, okay, however, on the other hand, or whatever phrase you're using, it could be some vocabulary. And it's a game. It's a gamified activity as well. And boom, they go into it. So you think, okay, so stuff like that, where it's just a simple speak, you're just speaking together, really, but you've made it into a game of some kind. And I think they really go in for that.
Nice. So gamifying lessons, top tip number
Yeah.
1. What else would you suggest?
Movement. So getting them to move around. I think this is something I've used several times, is where you kind of get one group of students standing in the middle, looking out, another group of students on the outside. They got to talk to that person, and when you ding the bell, they've got to rotate so that they're in front of the next person. And you ding the bell, they rotate them in front of the next person. And just getting them out of their chairs, getting them to do this kind of weird standing and moving around, they get more active and they start speaking. Or just anything else that's kind of get them to jump around the class and find someone who they're then going to speak to. The other day, I used ping pong balls, which had numbers on them, and they had to find the corresponding partner. So they're running around the class looking for these ping pong balls, and then they're throwing them around the class. And it's suddenly, it sounds a bit chaotic, but they really get into it. And I think that helps. They forget, really, I'm just talking with a partner. That's what we're doing here. I'm just having a conversation in English. But now it's a big fun game that they're doing and moving around.
Exactly. So sort of introducing speaking without them realizing that that's exactly what they're doing, right? They don't realize. They realize, but like it's not like a conscious thing. Oh my gosh, I'm practicing my speaking. It's more like I'm just trying to find this person.
And also, I think I was going to say, like, putting some background music as well, that can really be assistant. Because a lot of the times when you're doing these speaking activities, there's always that pair who have added a lot of detail, and then there's one poor person still speaking at the end, and they go, oh, everyone's looking at me. So just having like some music on in the background can get rid of that fear that I'm going to be the last one standing here. So that can add into that kind of, if you're doing something with a lot of movement as well, I think, get a bit of music on, and then they're really going to get into it, I think.
Love that. I think that's a totally underestimated thing to do in the classroom, put music on. We just assume, okay, we're in the classroom, we have to write in silence, speak in silence. Whereas actually, if they're writing an essay, some people work better with music on, okay, some people don't. No. But like, it just brings the classroom to life a little bit. It doesn't make it so uncomfortable for you, for them, like you said, listening to others, comparing themselves. That's a really, really great idea.
Really useful. Mm-hmm. And well, that was kind of two top tips. So really, if I went for my third top tip, again, I sort of touched on it earlier, but just being a bit creative. And I like thinking, okay, just kind of unusual things to speak about. So it could be, for example, okay, I've found an article which has a strange topic. It could be we talked about animal stories earlier. Could be a video where something strange happened with an animal or something, or I can think of those videos where like the dog steals the reporter's microphone or something like this, and you just give them, right, here's two images. It's like a dog and a microphone. What's the story going to be about? Have a talk, and they're like, oh, that's really weird, like a dog and a microphone. Like, so just giving those kind of weird images, and they think, how could that be connected together? I've got no clue. But then that's sort of their first reaction. I've got no idea really. But then they sort of start talking and getting into it. Or things like I was playing with, like how many ways can you do a certain thing? So I did a Christmas, like, okay, so let's say we want to make a snowman, but you haven't got any snow. Right, what are you going to do? And I'm like,
I actually don't know
how
what
would
to
you
do.
do that? And then it's sort of like, oh, you could like get a bottle and you could perhaps put stuff on it, and then arts and crafts, or maybe you could draw it, or maybe you could make it out of boxes. And then they realize, oh, actually there are a lot of things you could talk about, and it's useful. You can use phrases of suggestion while you're doing that to say, actually, you know what, we can be suggesting things. So I think it's just something that's a bit off the wall, something that is not a typical, what are the pros and cons of technology, which they're used to seeing in the class. That's the sort of exam style questions, but something that's a bit more out there. And then they kind of have to start thinking, and they quite enjoy it as well.
Exactly, because that's when the best language comes out, right? That's when existing knowledge comes out. That's when you learn what students know that perhaps hasn't been elicited from what
Yeah.
they've got in their course books. It's like that classic, how many things can you do with a paperclip, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, when I originally did this, so it was the old Cadbury's cream egg adverts with that, or how many ways could you eat yours? And then I saw a poster of that as well. And I actually did that in one class as well, where I would say, we got this thing, how could you eat it? And then we saw some of these weird ways. And I thought, oh, yeah, actually, that's quite funny.
Getting the ASMR up on YouTube, watching people eating their cream eggs. Thank you. Great tips. Great tips. I think the focus was initially on advanced, but actually I think everything you said applies to all levels of all classes, whether it's face-to-face, online, monolingual, multilingual. I think there's some really useful tips that you've shared there. How can people hear more from you? Have you got anything coming up that you want to share, or have you got sort of a LinkedIn or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of going on my Instagram, Pit Stop English, which is basically just where I'm putting any of these crazy ideas that I've had, and just, okay, it's my place just to sort of store them as well. It's also good for me because I get to remember what they are, but also making lesson plans. I've got a couple of lesson plans I've made, so that's my sort of Instagram.
Perfect. Thank you. And one final question for you. AI, helpful or hindrance?
Well, for me, it's been absolutely nothing but helpful. I mean, I think it could become a bit of you just got to think, am I using this in a way that's beneficial for my students, or am I using it because I think it's cool and I want to play with it? And I think sometimes you think maybe it's because you just want to play with AI and it's your excuse to take the toy out of the box and play. So I think just it's really useful as long as, is it helping my students? Is it helping me make material for my students? That's got to be, I think, the thing we remember.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to share your experiences and your ideas as well. I'm sure people are going to take away lots of activities that you've mentioned. If you are listening to this episode and you're watching it on YouTube, please do feel free to write in the comments if you try any of Gareth's activities and how they turned out for you in the class. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we look forward to our next episode of the podcast. As Gareth said, we do have a YouTube video on a speaking practice on ChatGPT, so do check that out as well. And thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Bye, Gareth.
Thanks.